Mr. Speaker, will you please call the House to order?
The bill is passed.
We'd like to get a budget that represents the interests of the people who are standing here with me now.
To be part of the struggle to achieve a better society for all.
Hello, I'm Assemblymember Joanne Simon. I represent the 52nd Assembly District in Brooklyn. That's downtown and brownstone areas of Brooklyn. And I'm here today because today was Dyslexia Awareness Day here at the Capitol. It's the 5th time that we've brought in parents and students and educators from throughout New York State to focus on the issues surrounding dyslexia, which is a disability that is very much underdiagnosed and unrecognized. And we've been fighting for dyslexia awareness and equity in education for our students with dyslexia for a long time. And we were very grateful today to be joined by actor and producer Ameer Baraka. So, Mr. Baraka, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for joining me today for this interview.
Thank you. You know I would do anything for you because I know where your heart is.
So you talked today to students and you really spoke with such passion and commitment and told your story. So maybe you can tell our audience a little bit about how you came to be doing dyslexia advocacy work.
Well, I came by this work not that I was, I knew someone. I personally was affected by dyslexia and it went undiagnosed up until I was 23 years old in prison reading on a 3rd grade level. And there was a teacher, an educator there who took notice of my struggling and said, listen, man, you know, let me have you tested. And at that time, I didn't know what dyslexia was. And so he had me screened, brought some people in, had me screened, had me tested, and he said, Ameer, you're dyslexic. And that word sounds like hard. It sounds really bad, dyslexic. And so I thought it corroborated with what my mother had said about me all the while, that I was dumb and stupid and I couldn't learn and blah, 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 blah. But lo and behold, it did not have that type of stigma with it. So that's why I'm so that's why I'm an advocate. That's why I'm so adamant about getting the word out about early screening, early diagnose. I mean, when you think about, again, we walk through airports all the time and they screen us to prevent us from doing any bodily harm to any of any passengers. So why not screen a kid? We get prostate checks, we get mammograms, all these preventive measures, because we know that this stuff exists. And we know dyslexia exists, but we won't make it mandatory for kids who are in schools to be screened who are struggling. I'm not saying you have to screen everyone. You just have to screen people that are struggling, and get them the necessary remediation that they need. So I'm a big supporter of that, and I will not stop. Again, from every project hallway to every prison, to the United States Senate, to here, through every project hood. I go all over barbershops, bringing awareness to dyslexia.
You said something earlier today that I think was very compelling. You talked about the ability to read as being inextricably linked to freedom. Oh, yes. Can you talk about that a little bit and how, and explain to our audience why that is so important?
Yeah, well, I realized that my forefathers came here on slave ships and they were forced into slavery. They were forced. And I willingly gave my liberty over because I had committed a crime. And so I thought about that and I ruminated on that and I said, wow, I'm giving up my liberty, but I had no control. I had no control because of the fact that I could not read. And Frederick Douglass said something. He said that a slave will always be a slave if he can't read. And so Frederick Douglass made it his ambition and desire for all slaves to be emancipated, not from a physical slavery, but from the mental slavery. So not being able to read mentally incarcerated me. I was mentally incarcerated around the 3rd, 4th grade because I decided in my mind that I can't do school the conventional way and I have to sell dope because that was my immediate way of looking at making money, because I grew up in those projects and that's all was around me. So it's a prison. It's a prison, and if you haven't experienced it, you don't know what it is. And I think that's why it's so difficult to get the word out. It's so difficult to get legislation to push this issue because they haven't experienced it. They've been privileged all their lives. They don't know what it is not to be able to read, the challenges that one faces, particularly in those urban areas. And what we show is every time we show stories on Good Morning America or CBS News, we showed our Caucasian brothers or sisters on there stationed out by some yacht or stationed by some nice palatial home. And we say, oh, this kid is dyslexic and he made it, he did this. But they're not showing the ugly side of dyslexia. The ugly side is where I come from. Our prison systems are replete with dyslexic men and women. That's the ugly side. People who don't have parents that don't have $75 an hour to get remediation. What about those children? They go astray. They lose hope. Their schools are not supportive. Parents are really not supportive because they don't know what it is. And so that kid falls down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, you know, one of the things that has struck me is how the schools find some reason why students are not being successful. And sometimes, yes, they will make a child feel that they're dumb. But at other times, you know, they'll look at other indicators, family living in poverty, parents working 2 and 3 jobs, not being able to have the time to spend with their child, the parent who was themselves the victim of a poor educational system and doesn't either value education or didn't learn to read themselves. And of course, we know dyslexia runs in families, and they may very well have been a person who is dyslexic who was never identified and properly given the proper attention in school. And that our systems are designed to kind of almost find every other possible reason other than that a child is dyslexic.
Yeah, well, I don't believe much in the system. This system that governs us. If you look back at it, it's always been prejudice in many ways. And yet it's a decent system, but it's not as good as it should be. And so it's going to take a lot of work, and I want to thank you for the work that you're doing and other Assembly people and senators are what they're doing, Senator Bill Cassidy, because this issue is a bipartisan situation. And so it's going to take that. But, you know, you're talking about tearing down a system and building it back up. And that's what you're talking about. That's what people are afraid of. And on the flip side of that coin, our prisons, again, are filled with free labor. I did 4 years in prison, excuse me, and I worked in the fields down there in Louisiana, and I received $80 after a 4-year sentence. And so all the labor that I placed, all the labor that I had put in for the state, I mean, you build stop signs, you build refrigerators, woods, all kind of wood desks. So it's a lot of free labor that's going on in the prison system. So why should I educate you? Why should I mean, it's a new form of slavery. It's just another side of slavery, and this country needs free labor and always will.
Yeah, mass incarceration is, a huge problem in the United States at several levels. And of course, I know you've talked about the streets to prison pipeline. And so often our children, who, if we're not giving them the attention they need, we're not teaching them to read, we're holding them back, we are not giving them the freedom that they should have in their lives to be able to be all that they can be, because we've kept them from knowing about themselves and understanding what their needs are, and we've denigrated those needs too often. And often it's done because the teachers and educators don't realize what the problem is. And so one of the things we're working on, along with early identification, is making sure that our teachers become acquainted with dyslexia, that they learn methods of teaching reading that are consistent with the science of reading and how the brain processes reading. Because we know that the brain actually is not wired for reading. And so many people need direct instruction, and particularly people who have dyslexia. I'm curious about the speaking that you do around the country, whether you're speaking with teachers about this, what the kinds of responses from teachers are about how they feel about their skills. Do they feel that they know how to address students' needs? Because I know I saw a recent study that only 22% of teachers believe that early reading is linked to systematic phonics, for example. Yeah,
it's overwhelmingly disappointing. A lot of teachers really want to teach, but they don't know how to deal with this particular issue. And so you see a lot of that. You see some teachers completely oblivious to dyslexia. I was in a school, and I won't name the school, in Louisiana, but this was a school for juvenile offenders, and the dean of the school had no idea what dyslexia was, no idea. So it's scary. This thing has been around since the late 1800s, and yet you don't know you are an educator. So we have to bring that awareness, and we have to equip our teachers, because I truly believe that teachers want to do their best, but they only can work with what they have. So they need other things in their toolbox to go in and do an extraordinary job. I also believe that poverty does not make you commit crime. I think it's poor morals and poor values and a self-imposed limitation. When you don't feel good about yourself, when you can't read and you can't write, more than likely you're going to do something that's off. I mean, I know so many kids who went on to do very, very well growing up in those areas, but they was able to read and write fluently like my brothers and sisters did. So we have to address this issue, and if we don't, we're going to continue to build prisons. And if that's what this great country wants, that's what they want.
Well, we have to change that so that they no longer want that.
Absolutely.
Obviously, it seems to me one of the great failings of our society is that we have reveled in mediocrity sometimes.
Yes.
And that has come from on high at times, that if students are just average, that's okay. And yet we have so many students who are average, above average intelligence, who are not able to function in school because they have a reading disability. They haven't been exposed to the kinds of instruction that they need, and then they start feeling bad about themselves, they start lacking in self-esteem, and then they give up. And I think that was part of what you were talking about today, is kind of giving up on yourself because there wasn't an avenue not to do that.
Can you imagine if Steve Jobs gave up or Bill Gates gave up? Think about that. Think about Bill Gates, the extraordinary amount of creativity in Steve Jobs. Imagine Steven Spielberg, those beautiful pictures. We'd have never saw them. We'd have never experienced the iPhone. But they didn't give up. They had people around them. They had the resources. So it's crucial. It's very, very crucial that we keep our children encouraged, that we do not belittle our children. I know it could be frustrating to parents coming home and the kid is acting up, etc. But it's nothing wrong. It's he or she has a disability that needs to be addressed. But the most important thing that parents can do is encourage their kid, get their kids involved in sports, some type of activity where they can push them along and encourage them and keep them focused.
Thank you so much for being with us today, for sharing your time and your expertise and your story, your very powerful story with the parents and the kids and the educators who are here today, and for speaking with me today here on Assembly TV. We're going to be making sure that everybody knows about this issue. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.